There have been many women who have come to us with, a grocery bag with their possessions, and then that's all that they have. Many of them are homeless and they are living in encampments in the area. They might be couch surfing, maybe they are finding individuals that are able to, house them on a temporary basis. But for the most part, they lead a very transient life. So they generally don't have a lot of possessions.
Welcome to Shoresides, a podcast where we explore the coastal North Carolina region's past, present, and future to promote community resilience. I'm Nicholas Magrino. North Carolina consistently ranks among the highest states for human trafficking cases. Coastal North Carolina is ripe for traffickers not only because it's a tourist destination, but also due to its high number of active military bases and proximity to Interstate 95. According to the Human Trafficking Hotline, 235 cases of human trafficking were reported last year. While the crime itself is a hot-button issue, what gets talked about less are the survivors who escape this traumatic experience and are left to pick up the pieces of their lives. We'll speak to Dawn Ferrer, Executive Director of A Safe Place, to learn about how homelessness intersects with those who have been through these horrific experiences. A Safe Place is a nonprofit organization that receives funding and volunteers from St. James Parish, and their mission is to help survivors of human trafficking find housing.
One of the biggest components is finding housing, even if it's temporary, if it's a shelter when they're in crisis, but finding a place that understands the complexities of what these individuals have been through. Most of it is, trauma starting in childhood. Most of them have substance use. And then, of course, the trauma of being exploited and trafficked. They're dealing with a lot. So there's, mental health concerns. So it's truly just finding, the right fit for them. And the other part really is just the whole affordable housing issue, which is impacting our area greatly. There's just not a lot of options for them, unfortunately.
Substance abuse has historically been one of the biggest commonalities among survivors of human trafficking.
The number one vulnerability really in the U.S. to being trafficked is that substance use component. And we see that, 95% of the women we work with do struggle with substance use. And in some of those instances, it started prior to being trafficked and then, made them vulnerable because it's a recruitment tactic for traffickers. And then it's used as a way of controlling them to keep them in that situation.
Many of these survivors are people who have nothing left and nowhere to go. According to the Department of Justice, LGBTQ+ youth have been the most targeted demographic among minors for trafficking. And while the people that Ferrer works with are most commonly white females, their ages can vary.
So last year, the average age was 38, which it really has been getting older. When I first started with A Safe Place over 9 years ago, I think our average age was 23. But we do think that correlates with the substance use disorder. That has become so interrelated. I think they're taking longer to actually ask for help. That's what we associate it with. But we've worked with, one of our youngest was 14. We worked with law enforcement and the Carousel Center, and, it's everybody coming together to help that victim. But then we also have women in their 60s sometimes that reach out to us.
According to Ferrer, when the survivors escape, they often struggle to return to normal life. Between substance abuse issues and other mental health problems that come from their trauma, they are just not in a position to make it on their own. And finding places that will care for them and support their needs can be difficult.
So most of the women that we work with aren't really ready for an apartment by themselves. They need more structure than that. But even if they were ready, it is finding those places that aren't in horrible locations, where they can live safely and begin to heal. We currently don't have a residential program. We're opening one next spring, but we do have something called our supportive housing program. And what we do is we'll pay for a certain amount of time at an approved recovery house, because that's the step we recommend for them, that they do the recovery house route, do that for at least 6 months. And then we do have funding. We can pay their first month's rent and security deposit, but where that is going to be is the problem. Brunswick County, Pender County tend to be a little more affordable, but most of them don't drive, so they're getting services here in New Hanover County. And then for them to live someplace else and figure out what that employment looks like, it presents obstacles to them.
Most of these recovery houses will only take in people who have substance abuse issues. Those who do not can have their options limited. Sometimes these places can house someone temporarily in emergency shelters, but will not keep them in the long term.
There's 5 or 6 approved recovery houses that we work with. We can usually get them placed, but I will tell you, when we have a survivor that does not have substance use, it makes it difficult to find a safe program for them when they're in that situation. Because substance use is so interrelated, most of them are struggling with that. But a perfect example, we have the Healing Place here now, which is a good alternative, and they do have an emergency shelter, but obviously they have to have a substance use disorder, to stay there.
A Safe Place is looking to close this gap in care by creating their own residential program for Wilmington and the New Hanover County area.
So we used to be more crisis management. So we had an emergency shelter. So somebody could come in 24 hours a day. We would meet them where they're at and deal with them during that crisis. But the problem is we had them for 60 days, and then where do we go? Then where do we send them? So it was a tough position to be in. So we decided to do this long-term residential program. So they'll be able to stay with us for up to 2 years. We're calling it the farm because the goal is to have farm animals, vegetable gardens, flower gardens, go to farmers markets, actually have a for-profit side where we'll employ the women in our program and just give them the time they need, especially when there's that substance use disorder. We're really finding it's that they need 2 years to heal.
Ferrer also feels that at the root of many human trafficking cases is childhood trauma. She thinks that in order to make the biggest impact on the trade of human beings, helping children who have been through traumatic experiences is paramount, both for policymakers and society as a whole.
I think one major thing is for people to recognize the impact that adverse childhood experiences have on an individual. So these are those negative experiences a child goes through. So before the age of 18, when their brain is developing and they're trying to figure out who they are. When you're going through those traumatic situations, we now have a much better understanding of how that can carry over into adulthood and what that trauma can do, especially if they don't have the support when they are children, to work through that. So I think from a policy standpoint, it is truly recognizing that ACEs are a public health crisis, and then our kids need our help. So I think that's one area, because the majority of the women that end up in our program had domestic violence in the family. They were sexually abused, physically abused, so all those vulnerabilities, those are the things that they had. So if we could somehow figure that out and figure out the best way to help kids, I think that could directly impact it.
Ferrer's goal with the farm program is to not only provide housing to survivors, but also aid them in finding employment. That way, when they leave to find their own places to live, they are ready to support themselves with dignity.
The plan is to have, I have a meeting in September. We're going to do an employer job fair where I bring employers in and we talk about substance use and trauma. And I'm hoping to find maybe 4 or 5 employers that are just willing to hire, our women that are going through the farm program.
From Shoresides, this is Nicholas Magrino. Learn more about Shoresides at shoresides.org. Thank you for listening.